The tunnel was damp, lined with concrete ribs that echoed every scrape of Daniel Reed's elbows as he crawled forward. Dust clung to his palms, and his breath fogged in the cold desert air seeping through narrow slits above. Outside, the Sonoran night was alive, wind carrying sand like whispers, the low hum of a generator vibrating from the cartel's warehouse less than a quarter-mile away. He had done hundreds of surveillance ops before, but tonight the silence pressed heavier than usual. His partner, Maya Ortiz, was on a rooftop 2 blocks east, her rifle fixed on the cul-de-sac where his ex-wife lived now. Daniel blinked sweat from his eyes, adjusted the headset in his ear, and pressed forward. The plan was straightforward. Mark Victor Hale's movements, confirm the drop site, and wait for backup. But then, his earpiece crackled. A sound jagged and unexpected, not Maya's crisp voice. A child's breathless whisper bled through the static. "Dad!" Daniel froze, muscles coiling in instinct. "Ava!" Her voice broke, carrying terror that no field op could ever prepare him for. "Daddy, he's holding Mom's wedding photo over the fire." Daniel's gut twisted so hard he nearly lost his balance. His daughter's words didn't belong in this night, in this mission. In this world he had compartmentalized away from her. His pulse roared in his ears, but her sobs cut through it sharper than any siren. Then another voice, male, confident, too close to the phone. "Watch her past turn to ash." "Victor." The taunt crawled through the line, cruel and deliberate, and Daniel's vision narrowed until all he saw was the orange flicker bleeding through blinds across the cul-de-sac. His chest constricted. He had faced men with guns, grenades, and cold eyes, but hearing that smug growl directed at his family was a different kind of battle. Personal, surgical, intimate. "Listen to me, Ava," Daniel said, forcing steel into his tone though his throat burned. "Count to 3 and set the phone down where he can't see it. Do you hear me?" 3, 2. The line went dead silent. He slid forward faster, crawling until the tunnel spat him out near a drainage culvert overlooking the street. From the shadows, he aligned his scope, finding the east-facing window of Helen's living room. Through slatted blinds, the silhouette came into focus, broad shoulders pacing near the fireplace, a picture frame lifted high. An orange glow licked the walls. Helen's voice trembled into the night, muffled but distinct. "Please don't." Daniel's hand didn't shake. Training buried emotion under precision. He tapped his mic. "Maya." East window. Movement near the fireplace. On the rooftop, Maya's calm reply steadied him. "Copy." Shadow marked. "Waiting for your call." He exhaled slowly, walked the IR laser across plaster until the red settled on Victor's chest. For a moment, he remembered the photo, the real one, shot on a pier years ago, sunlight in Helen's veil. Ava's small hand curled around his thumb. He tightened his jaw. "Send it," he said. The night coughed once, softly, as Maya's suppressed rifle answered. The silhouette jerked violently and crumpled against the hearth. The orange glow dulled. The frame clattered to stone, and silence smothered the room. Daniel rose from the culvert, heart slamming, and sprinted across the cul-de-sac. Porch lights flicked on as neighbors peeked out, confusion spreading. He didn't stop until he reached the door, shoved it open, and saw Helen standing there with her hair half loose, hands blackened with soot, eyes wide. Not only with fear, but something unreadable beneath it. The wedding photo lay face down on the rug. Its backing, rippled by heat, still smoked faintly. Ava's cracked phone buzzed under the couch, the call line still open. Victor Hale lay on the carpet, blood seeping into its weave, chest rising and falling shallowly. He wasn't dead. Not yet. Daniel's breath came in hard, clip bursts. He had faced hundreds of enemies, but never one who stared back at him from his own living room. And tonight, the war had followed him home. The room stank of smoke and iron. Helen stood frozen near the hearth, her hair half fallen from its pins, the edge of her cardigan singed. Her wide eyes met Daniel's, but she didn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly, yet they stayed close to her sides as though she'd already rehearsed where they should be. Behind her, the frame lay on the rug, glass cracked, heat warping its cardboard back. Victor groaned, rolling partly onto his side, his breath wet and shallow. The bullet had ripped through his shoulder and grazed his throat. Blood seeped into the fibers of the rug, spreading dark tendrils. "Stay back," Daniel said, motioning Helen aside as he moved in. He kicked the frame gently to one side, eyes never leaving Victor. A small hiss escaped Victor's lips, half laughter, half a choke. He tried to speak, but only a guttural rasp came out. The sound was gutted, ugly, but his eyes, cold, mocking, still carried the same menace. Maya's voice crackled through Daniel's earpiece. "Target down. Breathing but hit. Local police en route. Medics too. You've got 60 seconds." Sirens were faint at first, then swelled, bouncing off stucco walls and desert stone. Porch lights came on in sequence up and down the street. Neighbors leaned out, confused murmurs rising. The cul-de-sac had never seen violence like this. Helen finally moved, stepping toward Daniel. "You didn't have to," she began, but stopped when she caught his look. His eyes were sharp, scanning, not for her, but for every detail of the scene. She swallowed. "Ava's upstairs," she whispered, voice cracking. She locked herself in her room when he grabbed the photo. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to run up those stairs, scoop Ava into his arms, tell her the fire was out, the nightmare done. But he couldn't. Not yet. Training pinned him in place. "Go get her," he ordered Helen, voice clipped. Helen hesitated, a flicker crossing her face. Fear? Guilt? Before she turned and hurried up the staircase. Blue and red lights flared outside. The front door crashed open, 2 medics and 3 uniformed officers sweeping in. "Hands where I can see them," one officer barked. Daniel raised his hand smoothly, badge credentials already at his belt, voice steady. "Read DHS tasking. Suspect incapacitated, needs medical." Medics dropped to Victor's side, working quickly, cutting away fabric, pressing gauze to his neck and shoulder. Victor's eyes stayed locked on Daniel, even as the mask went over his mouth. It was the look of a man who refused to lose, even as his body betrayed him. A thump upstairs, Ava's door. She rushed down in Helen's arms, her face streaked with tears. The moment she saw Daniel, she broke free, barreling into his chest. He caught her, pulled her tight, his jaw set against the tremor in his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder, her small voice muffled. "Daddy, I said it just like she told me." Daniel froze, a chill cutting sharper than any desert wind. He glanced at Helen over Ava's head. She looked away. Detective Rivas entered last, his calm stride setting a different rhythm in the chaos. Gray at the temples, a notebook already half open in his hand. He scanned the scene, the frame near the hearth, the smell of burned paper, Helen's soot-marked fingers. His gaze lingered on Daniel, then on Victor, then back to the warped photo frame. He knelt, sniffed the air near it. "That smell isn't just cardboard," he murmured to himself, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. "Plastic, maybe." Helen tensed, shifting Ava's hair like a shield between them. "Read," Rivas said evenly. "We'll need a statement." And that body cam footage. His eyes narrowed slightly, as though testing Daniel's reaction. Outside, medics wheeled Victor out on a stretcher, oxygen mask in place. He was alive, but his voice, his weapon of choice, sounded already gone. The flashing lights painted the house in restless colors. Neighbors whispered. Cell phones glowed. Shadows stretched long across the cul-de-sac. Daniel held Ava tighter, but his eyes never left the frame near the fireplace. Warped, cracked, still faintly smoking. Something about it felt wrong, as if the photo hadn't just been a symbol, as if it had been hiding something all along. Detective Rivas crouched near the hearth, his pen tapping the warped photo frame as if listening for a heartbeat. The backing was curled, the once clean lines of the cardboard now bubbled, faintly blistered. He scraped it lightly with his nail, lifted his hand, and sniffed. "Not just smoke," he said quietly. "Something synthetic. Plastic, maybe. Melts different." Daniel stood a few feet away, Ava clinging to his arm. He studied Helen's face as Rivas made his observation. Her lips pressed together, her eyes sharp and darting, as though each second the detective lingered on that frame pulled at a thread she didn't want unraveled. Helen adjusted her cardigan, clearing her throat. He was obsessed with destroying old things. Photos, memories, anything from before him. He said it gave him control. Her voice trembled at the edges, but Daniel caught how deliberate her phrasing was, how quickly it came, like a line already rehearsed. Rivas didn't answer. Instead, he slid the frame into an evidence bag, the pen still tucked in his fingers like a bookmark. We'll take this with us. Might tell us more than it looks like. Helen shifted uneasily, her eyes flicking toward Daniel for a second too long. Medics rolled Victor through the doorway, his body strapped, gauze clamped tight against his throat. He wasn't dead. He wasn't even unconscious. His eyes, dark and sharp even through the mask, tracked the room until they found Daniel. He tried to speak, but only a broken rasp spilled out like metal grinding on stone. For the first time since the shot, Daniel felt a shiver. Victor's mouth had lost its power, but those eyes, the mocking, unbroken stare, told him the fight wasn't over. The room thinned of uniforms, leaving only Rivas, one officer cataloging evidence, and the three of them, Daniel, Helen, Ava. The flashing lights outside painted shifting shadows across the walls, turning the family's living room into a theater of fractured colors. Ava pressed her face against Daniel's arm, whispering, "I thought he was going to burn it, Daddy. The picture. I thought he'd make her cry." Daniel kissed the top of her hair, but his eyes stayed locked on Helen. "You told her what to say, didn't you?" he asked softly, so only she could hear. Helen's shoulders stiffened. "She needed to know how to get your attention. That's all." "That's not all," Daniel said, his voice low, steady, the kind of calm that cut deeper than anger. Rivas rose, flipping his notebook closed. "We'll need both of your statements tonight. Separate." He looked at Daniel, then at Helen. "Don't leave town. Either of you." Helen's mouth parted as if to argue, but she stopped herself. She gave a quick, controlled nod, her hands smoothing Ava's hair with almost exaggerated gentleness. As Rivas stepped outside to coordinate with his team, Daniel bent down to Ava's level. "You're safe now," he said, even though his chest told him otherwise. "Stay with me tonight." "Okay." Her small nod buried into his chest. He led them out into the night air. Neighbors clustered in loose knots under the glow of street lamps, whispering, phones glowing as they filmed from a careful distance. Helen kept her eyes down, guiding Ava quickly into the back seat of Daniel's car. Daniel opened the driver's door, but before climbing in, he glanced back at the house. Through the open doorway, the living room still flickered with red-blue light. On the hearth, the absence of the photo frame left a naked patch of stone. And in Daniel's mind, the words replayed, not just smoke, something synthetic. The frame wasn't just sentimental. It had been used for something, hidden for something. As he started the car, Helen's voice broke the silence from the back seat. "You don't have to look at me like that, Daniel. I was just trying to protect Ava." Daniel gripped the wheel jaw tight. "Then why does it feel like the fire wasn't meant to destroy a memory, but a secret?" Helen didn't answer. Ava slept against her mother's shoulder before they reached his apartment. But Daniel's eyes stayed on the road, unblinking, his mind turning over the warped frame, the smell of melted plastic, and the cold fact that his daughter's plea had sounded too perfectly designed to ignore. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and lemon polish, a brightness that felt false in the middle of the night. Daniel stood just outside the glass of the trauma unit, his arms folded tight across his chest. Inside, Victor Hale lay strapped to a gurney, tubes feeding into his arm, a ventilator humming low. Surgeons had finished stabilizing him. The bullet had torn through his shoulder and grazed his trachea. Alive, but the damage was permanent. He would breathe. He would blink. But his voice, the venom he wielded so freely, was gone. Daniel stared at him, unblinking, until the reflection of Detective Rivas cut across the glass. The older man stood with his hands in his coat pockets, eyes narrowed, jaw set in a way that suggested he was piecing together more than just the night's chaos. "You hit him clean," Rivas said, voice even. But here's the thing, Reed. Your daughter's call never came from her phone. He pulled a folder halfway out from under his arm. Signal was routed through a VoIP bridge. Somebody wanted that distress to land directly in your ear. Daniel's body stiffened. What are you saying? That was staged. Rivas didn't answer immediately. He tapped the folder against his palm, then slid it back into place. I'm saying someone knew the exact trigger to make you move without hesitation. We'll trace it, but you should ask yourself who stood to gain from Victor Hale being silenced. The words sat heavy between them, and before Daniel could reply, the glass door creaked open. Helen stepped into the corridor, cardigan pulled tighter around her shoulders, her face pale under the fluorescent light. Ava was asleep against her hip, her hair spilling over her mother's arm. Helen's eyes flicked toward the trauma unit window, then quickly away. Is he? She started, but her voice cracked. She tried again, softer. Is he going to live? He'll live, Rivas said, his tone clipped. He won't speak again. Helen's jaw twitched. Relief? Fear? Daniel couldn't tell. She adjusted Ava slightly, smoothing the girl's hair with careful fingers. Good, she said finally, then caught herself. I mean, at least he can't hurt her anymore. Daniel's eyes narrowed. This isn't over, Helen. Whatever tonight was, it doesn't end with him strapped to that bed. Her gaze snapped to him, sharp for just a moment, before softening into practiced sorrow. I was protecting her, she whispered, nodding toward Ava. That's all I ever wanted to do. But Daniel remembered Ava's small voice in the car. Whispering, I said it just like she told me. His jaw clenched. Protecting her? Or using her? Helen's face paled further. You think I'd ever? She stopped, her words tangled. Instead, she looked down at Ava, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She's all I have. Rivas studied the exchange like a man watching two chess players who didn't realize the game had already started. Finally, he exhaled. We'll need statements. Tonight. Separate. His eyes lingered on Helen. Don't leave town. Helen nodded once, lips pressed thin. She shifted Ava against her shoulder and walked slowly toward the waiting area, her steps deliberate, her posture unnaturally composed for a woman who'd just seen her partner bleed across the floor of her living room. When she disappeared through the doors, Rivas turned back to Daniel. You're not telling me everything you know, he said quietly. But she's not telling you either. One of you is about to break first. I suggest it isn't you. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on Victor's motionless body, the faint hiss of the ventilator filling the silence. Somewhere inside, a single thought pulsed steady and cold. This wasn't just about rage. This was about leverage. And if Helen had known the exact words to put into Ava's mouth, then she hadn't just been a victim tonight. She'd been a player. Daniel sat at his kitchen table hours before dawn, the apartment dim except for the desk lamp's harsh circle of light. Ava slept on the couch in the next room, bundled in one of his hoodies, her chest rising in steady waves. He could hear the faint wheeze of her breathing, a sound both fragile and grounding. In front of him lay the evidence bag Rivas had signed out temporarily, the warped wedding photo frame sealed inside. The cardboard backing was bubbled, its one straight edges bent like they had been pressed against flame. Daniel's hands were steady as he slit the seal with a utility knife. He told himself this was procedure, not obsession. But his chest knew better. He set the frame on the table, tilted it under the lamp. A faint odor lingered. Smoke, yes, but sharper, synthetic, the smell Rivas had noted. Daniel slipped a thin screwdriver into the seam and pried. The backing came away with a soft crackle, brittle from heat. Something tiny fell out and bounced once across the wood surface. A micro SD card, half-warped, its corner blistered like melted resin. Daniel stared at it, his pulse thudding slow and hard in his ears. Not just a photo, not just sentiment, evidence, hidden in plain sight, right where Victor had held it to the fire. He reached for the laptop, slotted the card carefully into a reader. For a moment, he expected nothing but corruption, melted plastic, and dead files. But folders appeared, hundreds of them. His breath caught. Names, numbers, scanned IDs renamed as recipes, spreadsheets camouflaged as grocery lists. He clicked one at random, lines of financial transfers spilling across the screen. Offshore accounts, shell companies, movement of money so large and deliberate it made his chest tighten. At the bottom sat a folder labeled Cielo Wedding, Fall 2008. Daniel hesitated before opening it. The file inside was a high-resolution scan of a wedding photo. Helen stood on a pier, veil lifted by wind. But the groom wasn't him. Half the man's face was cropped from the image, but his suit, his build, even the sharp line of his jaw. Victor. The timestamp burned at the bottom corner. 2 years before Daniel and Helen ever married. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the air draining from his lungs. His fingers pressed into his temples, as though he could push the truth back out. Helen had been married to Victor before she ever met him. She had hidden it, erased it, and built a new life. Until tonight, when the past rose up in flame and smoke. He clicked further, scanning through chat logs saved as PDFs. Conversations between H and V. Keep the frame near heat. If it warps, no one questions it. The key is inside. If the bureau gets close, we burn it. If Reed ties the warehouse to you, we detonate the past. He knows sentiment. He'll move fast. Daniel's jaw tightened. His name, written into their private script, like he was a piece on their board. A faint creak startled him. He looked up quickly. In the doorway stood Ava, barefoot, hair a messy crown around her sleepy face. She rubbed her eyes with her fists. "You're not sleeping," she mumbled. "I heard the clicky thing." Daniel forced his voice calm. "Just working." She patted over, dragging the hoodie's sleeves across the floor, and climbed onto the chair beside him. Her eyes landed on a laptop screen. The photo filled half the display. Helen in her veil, smiling in wind, standing beside a man who wasn't her current ex-husband. Ava's brow furrowed. "That's Mom." Daniel hesitated. "Yes. She told me once," Ava whispered, "that if anything scary ever happened, I should say those exact words about the photo. That you'd come fast." Her lip trembled. "I thought it meant she trusted you." Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. He put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "It means she knew me," he said quietly, "and how I would react." Ava's small fingers gripped his shirt sleeve, her face pressed against his side. Daniel stared at the screen again. The warped frame, the hidden card, the wedding photo that rewrote everything. The truth wasn't just about Victor's cruelty. It was about Helen's secret past and the game she had been playing for years. And Daniel realized, with a cold clarity, that tonight's fire hadn't been about destroying memories at all. It had been about protecting the secret hidden inside them. The hospital atrium was trying too hard to look like a garden. Potted bamboo lined the edges. A small fountain burbled in the center, and benches circled around as if they belonged in a park. But the air was too cold, too sterile, and the hum of fluorescent lights above reminded everyone where they really were. Daniel sat on one of the benches, his shoulders squared, eyes locked on the glass doors where he knew Helen would come through. The warped micro-SD card weighed heavy in his pocket, its existence a secret he wasn't ready to hand over to Rivas. Not yet. He needed to hear from her first. Helen entered a moment later, cardigan wrapped tightly around her, face pale, eyes darting. She looked more worn than she had in the living room, but Daniel noticed the same thing Rivas had. Her composure was too measured, her steps too deliberate, like someone holding a mask in place. "You want to talk?" Helen's voice was low, wary. Daniel gestured to the bench opposite him. "Sit." She did, smoothing her skirt as though the act might buy her time. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fountain's trickle filling the space between them. Finally, Daniel broke it. "There's a photo of you and Victor," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Dated 2 years before we married." Helen's body went still. She didn't ask which photo. She didn't even pretend not to know. Her hands folded in her lap, knuckles whitening. "I married him first," she admitted, her tone flat, almost mechanical. "Young. Stupid. It wasn't a wedding so much as a deal." Daniel's jaw tightened. "A deal. He had money, influence. I told myself I could keep my distance. Hold the rope, not get pulled. But when I met you, for the first time," her voice cracked. "You were everything he wasn't. Steady. Honest. I left. I thought I left it behind. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then why was his name all over your life again? Why was Ava calling me with lines you planted in her mouth? Helen flinched at that. Because after your third deployment, the bills didn't stop, Daniel. Rent, groceries, Ava's school. You weren't there, and I couldn't keep the house afloat. Victor knew. He found me. He offered stability, safety, at a price. Her words hung heavy, but Daniel's chest only burned hotter. And the price was dragging our daughter into it? Using her as bait. Helen shook her head quickly, almost desperately. No, I told her those words only in case of an emergency. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. But when Victor got suspicious, when the bureau started circling him, he wanted insurance. That photo wasn't just sentimental. It held everything. The card inside, the files. If he burned it, his past burned too. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And you stood there and let him hold it to the fire, knowing exactly what was hidden inside. Tears welled in her eyes, but her face hardened as she blinked them back. I knew you'd move if you thought Ava was in danger. You've always been predictable that way. The words sliced sharper than she might have intended. Daniel leaned back slowly, the fountain's trickle sounding louder, crueler. So you scripted her, Helen. You orchestrated tonight. Helen's lips parted, but no denial came. Only a small, defeated whisper. I wanted out. If he died, I was free. If he lived, he couldn't speak. Either way, it ended. Daniel stared at her, chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. You're not just a victim in this, he said finally. You're a player. Behind the bamboo planter, Detective Rivas stepped into view, as if the conversation had been a trap he'd laid all along. Two officers lingered just behind him. Helen Hale, Rivas said, voice low but steady. We're going to need you to come with us. Helen's eyes darted between them. Daniel's steady glare, Rivas's calm authority, the silent officers waiting. For a moment, it seemed she might fight, but then her shoulders slumped. She rose slowly, pressing a hand to her chest. You'll never understand, she whispered, her eyes landing on Daniel for just a heartbeat. I did what I had to. The officers stepped forward, cuffing her wrists with quiet efficiency. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She simply straightened her back as they led her away, leaving Daniel staring at the fountain, the sound of its water mocking the weight of the truth he had just heard. The drive back to Daniel's apartment was silent except for the hum of the tires on asphalt. Ava leaned against the window in the back seat, her small frame curled into the hoodie she had borrowed. Streetlights flickered across her face, catching the redness around her eyes. She hadn't said a word since the hospital, and Daniel didn't push. He knew the weight pressing on her chest mirrored his own. By the time they reached his place, the night had begun to thin into gray. Daniel unlocked the door, ushered her inside, and flipped on the lamp in the living room. The space was bare compared to Helen's house, just a couch, a low table, and a few photos on the wall from years before. For the first time, the simplicity felt less like solitude and more like safety. You can sleep here tonight, Daniel said softly, guiding her toward the couch. Tomorrow we'll get your things. Ava nodded faintly, curling into the cushions. Will she come back? She asked after a long pause, her voice almost too small to hear. Daniel knelt beside her, brushing her hair from her face. Not tonight, he said, honesty weighing down each word. She has to answer for some things first. Her eyes glistened, confusion mixing with loyalty. But she's my mom. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to give her certainty, but all he had were fractured truths. And she'll always be your mom, he said finally. Nothing changes that. When her eyes drifted closed, Daniel draped a blanket over her and stood in the dim glow of the lamp, staring at her small form. He thought of Helen's confession in the atrium. The flat way she had admitted marrying Victor first, the calm acceptance of using Ava's voice to trigger him. It wasn't the picture of a mother protecting her child. It was strategy, cold and deliberate. He poured himself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen counter, and opened the evidence envelope Rivas had signed out. The warped wedding photo lay inside, now sealed in a fresh bag. The card itself he had already cloned, but he couldn't bring himself to hand it over fully. Not yet. Not until he understood every piece. A sudden scrape startled him. He moved quickly to the window. Outside, the street lay empty, but the faint echo of a car, doors slamming, faded into the distance. He scanned the shadows, muscles taut. Nothing. Still, his instinct screamed that someone had been watching. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel made eggs, burn on the edges, and toast that popped unevenly from the old toaster. Ava sat at the table, picking at the crust, her eyes heavy but quieter now. Maya stopped by with a bag of groceries, setting it down with a crooked smile. You can't keep a kid alive on burnt toast, Reed. Ava's lips twitched into the smallest smile, the first Daniel had seen since the night before. After Maya left, Daniel and Ava packed a small duffel bag from Helen's house under police escort. The rooms felt wrong without her there. Clothes left in drawers, pictures still smiling from frames. Ava clutched a stuffed rabbit from her bed and held it tight all the way back. That evening, as Daniel stepped onto his porch, a gray sedan idled across the street. Its windows were tinted, its engine low. It lingered long enough to make his skin prickle before it rolled away, tires whispering against the asphalt. Back inside, Ava was curled on the couch again, hugging her rabbit. "Dad," she said softly, "did I do something wrong? Because I said what she told me." Daniel crouched down in front of her, meeting her wide, scared eyes. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. You were brave. You called me. You saved her life." She blinked slowly, tears spilling anyway. "But she's still gone." Daniel swallowed hard, pulling her into his arms. "Sometimes," he said, his voice breaking despite his control, "telling the truth makes people leave. But it's the only way to make sure we're safe." As she buried her face against his chest, Daniel's eyes drifted to the window. The street outside was empty now, but the unease clung to him. The war hadn't ended with Helen's arrest. It was moving closer to his home. Morning sunlight stretched across the blinds in thin stripes, cutting the apartment into bars of gold and shadow. Daniel brewed coffee in silence, the smell filling the small kitchen. Ava sat at the table, pushing cereal around in her bowl. She hadn't touched much food since the night of the shooting, and though she tried to act normal, her eyes carried the weight of questions she couldn't frame. "Dad," her voice was tentative, fragile. Daniel looked up. "Yeah." She fiddled with the stuffed rabbit in her lap, ears frayed from years of holding. "Did Mom ever love you?" The question struck harder than any bullet. Daniel set the mug down, buying time. He thought of Helen's smile on their wedding day, her laugh in the cramped apartment they once shared, and then of her cold admission in the atrium. "I married him first. It was a deal. I think she loved who I was when I was home," Daniel said finally, his voice even but low. "And when I wasn't, she learned to love other things." Ava lowered her eyes, tracing the rim of the bowl. "I don't want to hate her, but I don't want to forgive her either." Daniel reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. "You don't have to decide that right now. All you have to do is be safe." The knock at the door broke the moment. 3 sharp raps. Daniel's hand went to the pistol holstered at his hip before he even stood. He cracked the door and found Detective Rivas, coat collar up against the wind. "Morning," Rivas said, stepping in when Daniel gestured. His eyes flicked briefly toward Ava before softening. "You doing okay, kid?" She shrugged, hugging the rabbit tighter. Rivas turned to Daniel, voice lowering. "We picked up chatter. Some of Victor's people are nervous. That gray sedan you saw? Probably not a coincidence. Their spook the files on that card are in play. They'll test your defenses before long." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You saying we're targets now?" "I'm saying be careful. They don't know who has what. That's leverage in our favor. But it also means you're holding a live wire." Rivas left after a brief update, his warning hanging heavier than the silence he left behind. Daniel double-checked every lock in the apartment, then showed Ava how to slide the bolt herself. "If I say so, you lock this. No waiting, no questions." She nodded solemnly, her small hands gripping the metal. That night, the test came. Daniel woke to the faint chime of the back door sensor, once then twice. He rose silently, gun in hand, bare feet gliding across the cool floor. The latch was misaligned, shifted barely half an inch. Whoever it was hadn't made it inside, but they'd tried. On the patio bricks, he found it. A smear of soot, black and fine, and beside it, a brass picture hanger. Small, ordinary, except for what it implied. Someone had come looking. Not for money. Not for him. For the frame. When he returned inside, Ava was standing in the hallway, clutching the rabbit to her chest, her eyes wide. "Is it him?" she whispered. Daniel crouched, voice steady. "No, it's not him, but it's someone who thinks they can scare us." She pressed closer to him, trembling. "I don't want to go back there, Dad. To that house." "You won't," Daniel promised, pulling her into his arms. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed firm. "This is home now, and no one touches you here." But as he looked out through the blinds, across the empty street, the truth gnawed at him. The danger hadn't died with Victor's voice. It had just shifted focus. And for the first time, Daniel realized the frame wasn't just evidence. It was a beacon. The morning after the break-in attempt, Daniel didn't let Ava out of his sight. She sat curled on the couch, clutching the rabbit in her lap, eyes flicking nervously to the window every time a car passed outside. He moved through the apartment with deliberate calm, checking locks, setting motion sensors, making breakfast he knew she wouldn't eat. By noon, the knock at the door came again. 2 sharp raps. Daniel pressed a hand to the small of Ava's back. "Stay here," he whispered, then approached the door with his pistol low at his side. This time, it was Rivas again. The detective looked more worn than usual, eyes heavy, coat wrinkled. He didn't wait for an invitation before stepping inside. "We need the car, Reed." He didn't waste time. "Victor's people are restless. We've got chatter about retaliation. The files could shut them down, but without them, they'll keep circling. And circling means danger, for her especially." He nodded toward Ava. Daniel's jaw set. "You'll get the files, but not until I know everything on them. I won't hand over leverage blind." Rivas sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're not just a soldier here. You're a father. Don't let pride blur that line." Daniel didn't answer. He only watched until Rivas left, his words lingering in the stale air. That night, the street outside was too quiet. No laughter, no cars idling, just the hum of a single street lamp. Daniel sat at the table with the clone microSD open on his laptop. Rows of numbers, false passports, shell accounts. But one file caught his attention. A ledger. Payments labeled with dates. The most recent was only 2 weeks ago. A transfer tagged simply H. His stomach tightened. Helen hadn't just been Victor's past. She had still been active in his dealings, right up until the raid. He closed the laptop quickly when Ava patted in, sleepy but restless. "Can't sleep," she whispered. Daniel guided her back to the couch, sitting beside her until her breathing steadied. But she stirred again minutes later, her voice breaking in the dark. "Dad, if Mom did bad things, does that mean I'm bad too?" The words cut him deeper than any confession from Helen had. He turned to her, gripping her small shoulders gently. "Look at me," he said, firm but soft. Her eyes met his, glassy in the glow of the lamp. "You are nothing like her mistakes. You're good, Ava. You're the reason I fight." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she buried her face against him. He held her tight, his hand steady on her back, even as his own chest heaved with unspoken rage. Later, when she finally fell asleep again, Daniel stood at the window, blinds tilted just enough to peer out. That same gray sedan was back, idling at the curb. Its headlights were off, but he could see the faint ember of a cigarette glowing inside. Watching, waiting. Daniel's pulse slowed, steadied, the way it always did before a firefight. He wasn't just a father now. He was a target carrying the one piece of leverage everyone wanted. And as the cigarette ember flared once more in the dark, he understood the truth Rivas hadn't said aloud. The files weren't just evidence. They were bait. And the longer he held them, the closer the wolves would come. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, its echoing halls filled with the shuffle of lawyers and the low murmur of voices. Daniel sat on a wooden bench just outside the hearing room, Ava beside him with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. She leaned against his arm, quiet, her eyes darting at every uniformed officer who passed. When the doors opened, 2 deputies rolled Victor Hale inside on a wheelchair. His shoulders were wrapped in fresh bandages, his throat covered by a thick collar. His eyes, though sharp-cutting, were very much alive. They found Daniel instantly, locking on with an intensity that didn't waver. Victor held a small legal pad in his lap, a pen strapped to his bandaged fingers. He scratched a few words onto the paper, his movements stiff but deliberate. Then he held the pad up so Daniel could see across the room. "Walk away. She pays. You keep the kid." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his face betrayed nothing. He stood, crossed the room, and took the note from Victor's lap. The edges of the paper were jagged, torn from haste. Victor's lips curled into the shadow of a smile, a soundless laugh rattling from his chest. Daniel folded the note neatly, turned, and handed it to Detective Rivas, who had arrived just behind him. Rivas read it, his eyes narrowing, then slipped it into his folder without a word. His glance at Victor was colder than steel. The hearing itself was brief, procedural. The prosecution outlined charges of financial crimes, money laundering, conspiracy. The defense asked for leniency on the grounds of medical condition. The judge, unimpressed, ordered Victor remanded with heavy restrictions. Through it all, Victor never stopped staring at Daniel. His eyes flicked once toward Ava, who shrank deeper into her seat, and Daniel's hand instinctively found hers, squeezing it firm. The message was clear, even voiceless. Victor wanted them to feel his shadow. When the session adjourned, Daniel stepped into the hall, Rivas close behind. "He's still pulling strings," Daniel said flatly. Rivas nodded. "That note wasn't for the record. It was for you. He's trying to play you, make you doubt Helen, doubt the Bureau, doubt yourself." Daniel exhaled through his nose, steady but hard. "I don't doubt him. I know exactly what he is." Rivas's expression softened briefly as he glanced at Ava, who clutched the rabbit tighter. "You'll need to decide soon, Reed. Keep that card hidden and you'll stay their target. Hand it over, you might end this quicker, but you'll lose control of how the truth lands." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And if the truth crushes her?" He nodded toward Ava. Rivas didn't answer. Instead, he clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder, firm but respectful, and walked away. That night, back at the apartment, the quiet felt heavier. Ava sat at the table, sketching aimlessly on scrap paper. Daniel opened the safe, staring at the evidence envelope. The warped frame, the card, the files, they were the hinge on which everything turned. Victor's scrawled words replayed in his head. "She pays. You keep the kid." It wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder. Helen's confession wasn't the whole truth, and Victor knew it. Daniel closed the safe with a slow click and looked over at Ava. She looked back at him, her small face tired but alert, eyes searching his for reassurance he wasn't sure he could give. He forced a small smile. "We're almost through this," he told her. But in his chest, he knew the storm wasn't over. It was only circling closer. And when it broke, it would take more than one truth to survive it. The courtroom was smaller than Daniel expected, its wood-paneled walls giving the illusion of warmth while fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The benches creaked with every shift, the low murmur of voices filling the space with tension. Daniel sat near the back with Ava beside him, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her lap. She leaned into his side, wide-eyed but silent. When a bailiff called Helen Hale's name, Daniel's chest tightened. She was let in through the side door, hands cuffed in front, her cardigan gone, replaced with a plain beige jumper that drained the color from her skin. Her hair, usually carefully styled, hung limp around her face. Still, her chin lifted with a defiant angle, a flash of the woman who had once stared down landlords and employers without blinking. Her public defender rose, shuffling papers. "Your Honor, the defense would like the court to consider the context of my client's actions. Ms. Hale was trapped in an abusive cycle, first under Victor Hale, then forced back into his world after her former husband's long deployments left her financially vulnerable. She acted under pressure, attempting to protect her daughter in the only way she knew." Daniel's jaw clenched. The words were polished, practiced, but they stripped away the choice Helen had made, the quiet, deliberate moments he had heard in her own confession. The prosecutor countered, his voice sharp. This wasn't survival. It was partnership. Ms. Hale laundered funds, maintained ledgers, and coordinated communications that kept Victor's network thriving. And when law enforcement closed in, she exploited her own child to stage a scene that forced Daniel Reed's hand. That's not protection. That's conspiracy. Helen's eyes flicked to Daniel then, holding his gaze for a heartbeat. Something passed across her face. Remorse, pride, maybe both, but she looked away before he could read it. The judge leaned forward, hands folded. Ms. Hale, do you understand the charges against you? Helen's voice was steady. Yes, Your Honor. And how do you plead? A silence stretched, the weight of it pressing on the room. Then Helen lifted her chin. Guilty. A gasp rippled through the benches. Even Ava's small body jerked against Daniel's side, her rabbit slipping slightly from her hands. Daniel caught it, placing it back gently in her lap. Helen continued, her voice flat. I knew what I was doing. I thought I could manage it. Keep control. But I used people, my daughter, my ex-husband. I crossed lines I can't uncross. She inhaled sharply, but her eyes were dry. I won't fight that truth. The judge's face softened only slightly before hardening again. Given the severity of the crimes, the court accepts your plea. Sentencing will reflect both the context and the deliberate nature of your actions. The gavel struck once. Deputies moved forward, guiding Helen back toward the side door. For a moment, as she passed, her eyes landed on Ava. The little girl's breath hitched, her hand tightening around Daniel's sleeve. Helen's mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. The deputies nudged her forward, and she disappeared through the door. The courtroom emptied slowly, voices rising into chatter. Daniel sat still. Ava pressed against him. She said, guilty. Ava whispered, almost to herself. Daniel looked down at her. She told the truth, he said softly. That matters. Ava's lip trembled. Does telling the truth always mean you lose? Daniel swallowed hard, pulling her close. Sometimes. But losing the lie is better than living in it. As they walked out into the daylight, the air felt sharper, brighter. But Daniel knew this wasn't the end. Victor still sat in silence, his network still alive. And Helen's guilty plea wasn't just admission, it was warning. The storm hadn't passed. It was waiting for its final strike. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Daniel sat at the table long after Ava had gone to bed, the glow of the desk lamp casting deep shadows across the walls. In front of him lay the laptop, the cloned microSD still open on the screen. The file scrolled past. Ledgers, transfers, false identities. He had combed through them dozens of times, but tonight something new caught his eye. Buried in a subfolder labeled receipts was a string of payments. One name kept appearing in the ledger. Not just Victor's, not just anonymous shell companies. Hale Reed. The entries weren't from years ago. They were recent. Money had been moved in Daniel's name. Accounts he never opened, transfers authorized with forged signatures. His chest tightened. It wasn't just Helen laundering funds. Someone had used him as cover. Before he could process, the motion sensor near the back door chimed once. Then again, Daniel's muscles coiled. He slid the pistol from his holster, moved silently through the living room, and pulled the blinds back just enough to see. The gray sedan was there again, but this time it wasn't idling. Its door stood open. Shadows moved toward the apartment. He turned back quickly, crossing to the couch where Ava slept curled under the blanket, her rabbit clutched to her chest. He touched her shoulder gently. Ava, wake up. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion fogging them. Dad, quiet now. We have to go. He lifted her into his arms, her small body tensing as she sensed the danger in his voice. The back latch rattled. Someone was testing it. Daniel moved fast, slipping them into the narrow hallway closet. He crouched low, one arm around Ava, the other gripping his pistol tight. She trembled against him, eyes wide. A shadow passed the crack of the closet door. The living room floor creaked. Two men, maybe three. They moved quietly, but not quiet enough. These weren't burglars. They were searching. Frame's here somewhere, a voice hissed. Boss said it doesn't leave this house. Daniel's grip on Ava tightened. The frame. Even now, they were chasing the secret Helen and Victor had buried. A step came closer. Daniel steadied his breath, ready to move, but before he did, a sudden thunder of boots pounded outside. A voice barked through a bullhorn. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Chaos exploded. Shouts. A crash. The men scrambled, one bolting through the back as officers stormed the front. Within minutes, the apartment swarmed with uniforms, flashlights cutting through the dark. Daniel stepped out slowly, shielding Ava with his body. Detective Rivas was at the center of it, barking orders. When he saw Daniel, his jaw tightened, then eased. "We traced them from chatter. Figured they'd make a move tonight." Ava clung to Daniel's neck, trembling. He carried her to the couch, sitting until her breathing steadied. She looked up at him, her small voice breaking. "They wanted the picture again, didn't they?" Daniel brushed her hair back. "Yes, but they're not getting it. Not anymore." Rivas approached quietly, setting a folder on the table. We dug deeper. Some of the accounts on that card weren't just Helen's. They used your name too, Reed. They wanted you tied to this from the start. Daniel's chest burned. "So even if Victor went down, I'd take the fall." Rivas nodded. "And Helen knew. That's why she played it the way she did, making sure you'd pull the trigger," forcing his silence. Daniel sat back, the truth settling heavy. Helen's plan hadn't just been about survival. It had been about shifting the blame, ensuring her daughter stayed with the one-man Victor's network couldn't corrupt. The final twist struck him harder than any revelation before. Helen hadn't orchestrated the call just to free herself. She had ensured that Daniel, not she, would stand as the shield between Ava and the world Victor built. Even if it meant using him. Even if it meant losing everything. Ava tugged his sleeve, pulling him back to the moment. "Are we safe now?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, at the fear still trembling in her eyes, and then at the deputies hauling the intruders out the door. For the first time in days, he let himself breathe. "We're safer," he said softly, "and I'll make sure we stay that way." Later that night, after Ava finally fell asleep again, Daniel opened the safe one last time. He pulled out the warped wedding photo, still sealed in plastic. The ripple in the paper looked almost alive under the lamplight. He slid it into a fireproof folder, labeled it evidence, and locked it away again. This time, when the safe clicked shut, it sounded final. Daniel sat by the window until dawn, the horizon breaking open with light. For the first time in years, he didn't think about war zones or contracts. He thought about Ava's small hand gripping his sleeve, about the life that still needed protecting here, in this quiet apartment. The storm had passed, not without scars, not without truths that burned. But what remained was enough.